the need to make America a Christian nation is a falsehood that drives a lot of this.
Hey everybody, we're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I'm Dr. Kristen.
You're very welcome to our conversation about Jesus Camp, which is a 2006, we went a little way back, documentary that is currently available on Hulu. You know, we decided to do these one-offs and kind of cover a whole bunch of things. And we talk about religion a lot here because Dr. Kristen is an expert in it. And this was one that came up on all the lists of documentaries to cover about it. Dr. Kristen's seen it before. I had not. It follows 3 kids to the Pentecostal pastor Becky Fisher's Kids on Fire camp, where young kids are basically taught to become Christian soldiers in God's army. It takes place in Missouri. It's during the time of the retirement of Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. So there's that kind of political, social, religious context. And really talking about the rise of this particular incarnation of the religious right, the entanglements of politics and religion, the chat shows and the talk radios and all of this that was happening in the 2000s. And the use of children. Heavily influenced, particularly Pastor Becky, by 9/11 and the war on terror, and the perception that President Bush was helping Christians in America and was there to do it. Also, the perception that Al-Qaeda was indoctrinating its young children to hate America. And so the counterpoint of needing to have Christian soldiers in God's army, because that's what the enemy was doing. So that sets the stage for our journey through the experience of Levi, Tori, and I'm not going to find the third kid's name off the top of my head, of course, and the other third kid, apologies if I find his name, and their experiences at this summer camp for God's Army. That's really going to be the end of what I say aside from color commentary, because this is Dr. Kristen's bag. I will say though, Colorado Springs, my hometown, my beloved hometown, makes an appearance at the end in the New Life Church, which was not in the part of town that I am from. But oh boy, the time of Ted Haggard and his scandal as the leader of the New Life Church was a time in all of our lives that I forgot about until this documentary rocked up to the New Life Church. Dr. Kristen, what were the big takeaways for Jesus Camp? What would you like our viewers to know? Viewers and listeners.
So I first saw this like right after it came out in a living room in Waco, Texas, when I was in seminary and a youth worker. Watched it with 3 other youth workers who all grew up in evangelicalism. And none of us were surprised. Mm-hmm. And many of us could tell our own stories about versions of this. So even before 9/11, we were being taught to be Christian soldiers, just with a less immediate enemy. Mm-hmm. And that language has been used for a very long time. And so the resonance is there. So I grew up, like I've said a lot evangelical, but I technically grew up Methodist, but of a strain that kind of happened in the mid 90s that we called Methacostalism, because it was like Pentecostalism married Methodist theology. So the clips you see of the kids with their hands raised and memorizing Bible, we actually called them sword drills, because the Bible is the sword of it's a whole thing. But I can still recite massive lines of scripture really, really easily. And it's very, very simple to put myself back there in a thought process. There is a growing perception in the United States among evangelical and conservative Christians that since the 1960s, the nature of the fact that we are a Christian nation has been being eroded. In the 1980s, that idea got money. And we started to get Christian publishing houses and Christian music labels and Christian music festivals, Christian answers to Woodstock, got even more, everything got more money in the 80s. So Christian colleges were around forever, but they got a lot more money in the 80s. Mm-hmm. So all of these kind of things. The need to make America a Christian nation is a falsehood that drives a lot of this. So you heard Pastor Becky say a lot of those kind of things. We were founded on Judeo-Christian principles. Well, the world was running on Judeo-Christian principles at the time, so that's not actually like anything that makes us special. We have 3 places in the Constitution. Article 6 of the Constitution and the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights has 2 separate clauses. 3 places where we are guaranteed the separation of church and state. The people that see America's need to be a Christian nation view that unilaterally as a thing that means every other religion and not Protestantism. So you're hearing this and you're like, this is all ridiculous. This is all whatever. A couple empathy things. I love a lot of people that still believe this. So if you think they're all crazies, many of them have PhDs. Some of them are pastors. Some of them are professors at colleges. There's a lot of very intelligent people that still think the way that Pastor Becky thinks. In the last 15, 16 years, with the rise of smartphones and the ability to carry everyone else's opinions with you wherever you go, there has been an added nature of militancy to this and upped levels of recruitment. I joke all the time that MLMs have nothing on evangelicals, like nothing.
They really don't, y'all.
Really, really don't. We know what we're doing. We know how to recruit. We go to training sessions on how to stop people on the street. We do all these kind of things. There is some beautiful, beautiful things about my faith. And unfortunately, you don't see any in this video. But I want you to understand that none of those kids are brainwashed in the way that you think they are. Or you have to say that all kids are brainwashed because they're parroting what they hear all the time.
Yeah.
Very few of those children are going to be like ostracized as children for believing different things, but would they be ostracized later in life? Possibly, for sure. But that's still not brainwashing and it's still not a cult. So kind of as a lot of the criticism of these things is that Becky's running a cult. She's not. And that these kids are being brainwashed. They're not. Now, is homeschooling an issue in terms of thought freedom? For sure. But all of this to say, I saw a lot of myself in that. And I don't ever defend a lot of what I did when I was growing up. I should also say my parents were not these people, our church was. So that's something that I struggle with a lot and deal with a lot, that I was very into what my church was teaching and my parents were actually frequently not fans of the methods that I was taught to share my faith. But in the aughts, the idea of a Christian subculture was even stronger. Mm. And the appointment of Justice Alito was a real turning point in the politicization of Christianity and the politicization of this version of Protestantism in particular. This might all sound messy as a review, but this is the best that I can articulate without crying in some ways and without being very angry and still challenging to hold my own empathy. Yeah. Becky is doing 100% what she believes firmly. She is doing it all out of love. Yeah. That sounds nuts to you potentially, but everything she is saying, everything she is preaching, everything she is doing is because she deeply loves those kids.
And I think like for me, in terms of empathy building, we spend a lot of time talking about like the impact of adult behaviors and thought processes on children. And if you feel comfortable talking about it, great. If not, I think one of the things that I thought was so visually impactful was thinking about the psychological impact of the collective performance and emotion.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, you get caught up in it.
That was involved in it. And like, it seems odd when you're watching it to see these children, but they're parroting what they've been told, and to have these emotional reactions. And there's a lot of power in the physical performance of rituals and the association with emotional and cognitive behavior that I think, what in 2006, if I'd have seen this, I would have been super judgmental. 2006 Aaron, 23-year-old Aaron, was not ready to be empathetic for what I was watching. But I think that's what stuck with me. That was what was the most emotionally effective part of the documentary. And one of the kids, Levi, is like kind of taken aside, and like they see this potential in him to be a pastor. He actually is now a youth pastor.
I started getting told that I was going to be a leader in the church when I was 7.
Yeah. And like, you can see he loves it. He feels that that's what he's doing. And it's not like he's doing what he's meant to be doing. He's good at it. He believes what he's saying, as much as an 11-year-old is able to do that. So I think it's so important to remember that as we're seeing it. And Becky is an interesting character, because you're right, she's not like inherently a baddie. I
have different feelings about Ted Haggard, by the way. So like, just so in case you think I'm like baptizing everybody with this grace, Becky is an earnest, true believer.
Yeah,
Ted was an opportunistic abuser.
Yeah. And we know this, right? There's always we spend a lot of times talking about institutions and how they are super welcoming places for abusers, because of the way that they operate and the access that they give them to the vulnerable group that they are abusing. And I don't know
I can't remember if he was like, his whole thing was that he was asked to leave his church because he was in a homosexual relationship.
Yes, he was.
So when I say abusive, I mean, for him, I believe he was spiritually abusive. So I don't believe he ever physically or sexually abused anybody.
I don't think
so. He was very, very, very spiritually and emotionally and verbally abusive in how he coerced.
Yes.
And how he coerced and built his church.
Yeah. So, right, there's the layers to the abuse as well. And the institution protects people, especially charismatic, impactful people, when the goal of your institution is to bring people in and to recruit people. And that is the driving belief behind.
And you can usually tell, just as a casual kind of throwaway. So Becky is not making a lot of money. You can tell that Becky is still very lower middle class at best. Excuse me. Ted Haggard had a lot of cash.
Yeah.
So when you look at what recruitment is for, recruitment for heaven and recruitment for your paycheck are very different things that we in evangelical Christianity have often combined.
Yeah.
In a way. And like, I remember, but like, just as I'll happily talk about the emotional impact, but like, even I was 21, I was a professional missionary. And one of the metrics I had for an organization called Youth for Christ, one of the metrics I had to report was how many people I had led to Jesus that year.
Yeah.
Which is a process of praying a prayer that I don't even theologically believe in anymore and barely believed in it then.
Yeah.
That was one of the measurement metrics, not how much money I raised or anything else. It was this idea of humans as a return on an investment.
Yeah. And like, we got a glimpse of that when they went bowling.
Yeah.
And Rachel, I found her name, the other child that they profile, like, talks about to the cameras how she felt compelled in her spirit to go talk to this woman and tell her about Christ. So like,
I'm sure I did that at some point in my childhood. 100%. Sure, I did that.
Totally. When you're
Yeah.
shown that's how to behave, and when
Yep.
you're
And that is loving. Like,
yeah.
that's the thing. You know, we make a lot of fun. Actually, you know, as you're watching this, we're in the process of making available a workshop that we've done on things we don't say anymore. And one of the things we're going to encourage you not to say anymore is things like Bible thumper, and getting really judgy about that, because for truly, it is a deep belief that this is what God has called them to, and that this is how you love people. Now, I think that love is very fractured and not great. But I will tell you, from the core of my being, for all the years that I believed the stuff that these kids believe, and that came off as superiority, and that came off as maybe even a little bit crazy, and came off as not kind or loving to other people, my motivation was always loving.
Yeah. And I think like you combine that motivation with what we see in this documentary is that, you know, these children are being taught how to be the right and the wrong way to be a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And they're being taught that, which we teach our kids how the right and wrong ways that we think how to be humans all the time.
Yep.
But they also use the constant threat of sin.
Oh yeah, and that's a big thing.
As a behavior control mechanism.
Yep.
So you combine that threat of stepping outside the right way you've been taught to be with this belief, genuine belief that you're doing everything out of love. That is some heavy stuff to be able to walk away from. And like the kids aren't able to do it, obviously, yeah. But like that's pretty potent cultural.
And we teach sin as separation from God.
Yeah.
That's what we teach sin as. So a couple quick sociological things. One of the reasons that this has evolved in Christianity is because at the very core of the gospel is a whole lot of ambiguity, and humans can't do ambiguity. And so and I think to a certain extent, the core of the gospel that Christ taught is so simple. People are like, that can't be that easy. So they have to like create all these other systems. Like all the man said was love your neighbor as you love yourself and serve God. And how do you serve God? You walk humbly, you love mercy, and you act justly. That's it. None of us know how to do that. So we come up with all these other systems to tell us how to do that. But a lot of it is that we can't handle ambiguity. You don't actually know if you're going to get to heaven. Nobody has any idea if heaven exists. All you're doing this is on faith. And faith is so much more powerful motivator than logic, because you can't poke any holes in it. So once you make this entire worldview, it doesn't matter anything else. Mm. The other thing is the idea of walking away from it. Really, really briefly, I'd love to address that if I can.
Yeah.
In a lot of us refer to the process of walking away as something called deconstruction. You will find a lot of Facebook groups. There's a lot of podcasts. There's a lot of Twitter feeds, people who are professional coaches in deconstruction, essentially at this point now. I am somebody, I absolutely believe that I deconstructed my faith. I did mine out of trauma, which you can listen to my TEDx talk from Chicago for more details on that. I deconstructed a lot of the trappings of what this looks like. I stripped back a lot of the massive cultural things I was taught to do. Stripped back I had to decide really what church is. What is prayer? What is worship? What is all these things that you guys can see through those kids, a little bit of what I was taught. What does it actually mean to be an American outside of being an evangelical? What does it mean to do all these things? I did that at 28 in the middle of a seminary education with a lot of support, and it was incredibly traumatic. I thought I lost a family. I thought I lost a calling. I thought I lost my relationship with God. But in the meantime, before then, there's a lot of stress of like, well, I don't feel close enough to Christ, or I don't know if this is right. Anytime you take something as ambiguous as a relationship with deity and try to programatize it, there's going to be stress. Mm. Even when these kids are totally happy, and I'm very, very hesitant to call them abused or anything else like that, as I've already said. The check mark of do this, do this, do this, do this, then you're a good Christian isn't great. because the check mark of do this, then you're a good human isn't great.
Mm.
It's not a sustainable system. And a lot of kids that were raised that way walk away. And in the evangelical church, that is lamented. And those of us who are on the outside of it are like, well, if we don't abandon the, like, be a good person, I don't know if it's to be lamented. I don't know. So all of that to say, I mean, yeah, like, I have a great story from the time I went to the Toronto Airport Christian Fellowship, which is a very Pentecostal church, of that I had gone up front to get prayer for something that I very earnestly believed I needed at the time, I'm sure. And there was other people around me reacting much more Pentecostally. They were, making noises that could have been speaking in tongues or things like that. And I was just standing there quietly with my hands open, which was the posture you were taught to do. And they were supposed to be going down the line and just very, ministering, praying and then moving on. But all of a sudden, this person next to me, like, had this very Pentecostal reaction, and there was 8 people on them, and then I got completely ignored. So the performativity aspect of this is massive. There were times that I raised my hands in worship, or I danced, or things like that, because I knew other people were looking at me and wondering what I was supposed to be doing in that time. What you do with your body in worship is very programmed by who you're around. In any worship. I mean, when I went to India, the whole point of an Indian puja is to make a ton of noise.
Yeah.
Because they fundamentally believe their gods are ignoring you. So I'm sitting quietly at the puja because for me, that's what prayer is. And I'm getting death glares from everybody because I'm not contributing to the noise of getting Vishnu to pay attention to us. So it's not just in Christianity. That one just happens to be the one I was raised in.
Yeah.
I'm sure we have some baggage from some other places where there's syncretism between government and faith as well. We have some Persian friends that talk about that with Iran and Iraq as well. But all of that to say, everything Dr. Aaron said is so, so true. And this is often the groups that we have left are the ones that are the hardest for us to have empathy for. Mm-hmm. So if you are a former something, those people are usually the ones that you're the angriest at because they haven't seen the light in some way. And that's very true for a lot of post-evangelical deconstructed folks. They're either very bitter against all Christianity or very hurt by this one brand or kind of things like that. So if you're listening to this and you're like, this is kind of how I was raised, I don't really know what to do with it, please know there's a ton of resources out there. I'd love to talk to you. Comment telling me your feelings and your thoughts. If you are super, super angry about this documentary, Dr. Aaron will probably be the one that responds. But if we're looking for a kind of a more holistic conversation, I'd love to enter into that with anybody who also knows what it's like to sing Onward Christian Soldiers while literally marching around a sanctuary.
Yeah, and I think on that note, we thank you for joining us. We thank Dr. Kristen for sharing her insights and her experiences and being willing to have this conversation, which isn't always an easy thing for her to do in these circumstances. But I hope you found it helpful or interesting. Please comment if you would like to continue the conversation. I think it's such a great empathy exercise to spend some time in these people's shoes and try to come from a place of non-judgment. That's hard for all of us, regardless of our experiences and our baggage, but it's really necessary because it's kind of how we learn how to human better, is to sit in that position of non-judgment. So we hope we've brought you along with us on this journey and that you got something out of it. We'll see you next time, wherever we see you.
Bye, folks.